Clint Danner had one rule: stay off his land, and his animals will stay off yours. But the woman in the tight beige suit and wedge heels didn't listen. She showed up on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and two teenage boys hauling a plastic HOA notice sign. Her name was Karen Witherspoon, and she claimed Clint's ranch sat within her aesthetic jurisdiction. Clint leaned against his handmade barn gate, flanked by two goats and a moody llama named Deputy. "Ma'am," he said, not blinking, "you're about 300 feet into my private property." Karen didn't budge. She pointed to the aging wood and rustic hinges. "This gate is an eyesore and doesn't align with community guidelines. We'll have it removed this week." "It's not compliant." "Community," Clint repeated. "The closest house is over that hill. You run an HOA for vinyl fences and lawn. Gnomes? I run a working ranch." Karen smiled. "Then consider this your final notice." 2 days later, Clint woke up to something off. The wind blew different without the gate creaking. Then he saw it. The entire gate was gone, removed, vanished. Even the post holes were filled. In the stillness of morning, he heard splashes, laughter, music. His pigs were missing. So was Deputy. And down the hill, by the community pool, a party was underway, complete with floating flamingos, kids in goggles, and one goat eating hot dogs off a grill. Clint climbed into his truck. He didn't say a word. Not yet, but he smiled. Because some people don't realize that when you tear down a man's gate, you let out more than livestock. You let out war. Part 2. 700 words. Clint pulled up just as Deputy the llama was drinking from the punch bowl. Children screamed. Parents ran. Karen, in a wide-brimmed hat and pool robe, stared at the scene like her HOA empire was crumbling in front of her eyes. A pig named Bojangles cannonballed into the shallow end, splashing to inflatable unicorns. And a woman with a martini. A goat jumped the fence and climbed a picnic table. Another chewed Karen's clipboard. Clint stepped out of his truck with a folding chair, calmly unfolding it next to the lifeguard stand. He nodded to Deputy, who spat directly onto Karen's beach towel. Karen charged over, drenched and livid. "Get your animals out of here." Clint crossed his arms. "That'd be easier if you hadn't removed the thing keeping them in. You think this is funny? I'm calling animal control." He looked at the pool. They seemed to be enjoying the water. "You're insane," she hissed. "You'll pay for this." He leaned closer. "That's what you'll have to prove." By the time animal control showed up, it was too late. The pigs had eaten every hot dog. The llama had trampled the DJ's sound system, and one goat had learned how to activate the pool's water slide. The officer looked at Karen. "Ma'am, were these animals invited?" "Of course not." The officer turned to Clint. "Sir, were your animals confined before this?" Clint nodded. "Before someone stole my gate?" The officer narrowed his eyes. "Did you file a police report?" Clint smiled. "Filing it today." Karen turned pale. And in the crowd, someone pulled out a phone and started filming. Part 3, 700 words. Karen doubled down. She filed a restraining order not against Clint, but against his animals. The courthouse couldn't process it at first. Llama can't technically obey a no-contact order, but the local news could. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. HOA president sues pig for trespassing. Restraining order issued against llama in Tennessee. Karen versus goat. Courtroom showdown next week. Clint said nothing. He just fixed his gate. Stronger. This time, steel brackets, reinforced wood, motion sensors. Then he made copies of the deed to his land, highlighting the property line that proved what he already knew. The HOA had zero jurisdiction over his ranch. At court, Karen stood in a coral blazer and 6-inch heels, arguing about unauthorized livestock incursions. Clint submitted video footage of her contractor removing his gate without permission. Karen's face twisted. That was a beautification effort. The judge leaned back. He removed a functioning fence from private property, and then sued a llama for entering a community pool. Karen's attorney whispered something. The judge snorted. Dismissed. With prejudice. Outside, the cameras waited. Clint didn't give a press conference, but Deputy did bite a reporter's microphone. And across the country, thousands started following Clint's social media, waiting to see what he'd do next. Clint didn't say a word as he stepped out of his truck. He didn't have to. The chaos unfolding in front of him did all the talking. His pig Bojangles had just flopped onto a floating pizza raft in the center of the pool, his hind legs hanging off the edge like he owned it. Another pig Tater rooted through a bowl of chips on the snack table, knocking it over entirely. The goats? They'd turned Karen's pool party centerpiece, a golden flamingo floaty, into a chew toy, and Deputy, his llama, stood proud atop the diving board, surveying the neighborhood like a sheriff in a frontier town. The soundtrack, Karen's HOA hired DJ blasting Sweet Caroline while people screamed, slipped, and scattered. Karen came stomping toward Clint, soaked in chlorinated water, her heels sinking into the lawn with every furious step. "You think this is funny?" she yelled, flailing her arms toward the pool where two pigs were now wrestling. Clint calmly unfolded a green camp, chaired from his truck bed and took a seat on the lawn. "I don't think it's funny at all, ma'am. I think it's predictable. You're going to jail. I'll have every one of these things put down." He arched a brow. "They're livestock, not criminals." Although Deputy has been known to spit in court, Karen shrieked as the llama proved Clint's point. A wad of spit arced from the diving board, landing squarely on her shoulder. That's when animal control arrived, pulling up behind Clint's truck. A tired-looking officer named Jackson stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched atop his head. "Who's the property owner?" he asked, scanning the scene. "That'd be me," Clint said, standing. Jackson squinted. "And? These are your animals?" "Sure are." Karen marched up beside him, jabbing her finger in the air. "This man weaponized his livestock. He's terrorizing the neighborhood. They swarmed our pool party." Jackson held up a hand. "Ma'am, please, one at a time." She kept shouting. "The pigs knocked over the grill. One of them chased my nephew. That donkey peed in the kiddie pool." Clint blinked. "That's a llama. I don't care if it's a giraffe with a criminal record. Arrest him." Jackson turned to Clint. "Did your animals escape?" Or Clint handed over his phone, pulling up a video from his security cameras timestamped from 2 nights ago. The footage clearly showed Karen's hired contractor cutting the hinges. Off Clint's gate, under cover of darkness, Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jackson nodded slowly. "So, the thing that was keeping your animals in, she removed it." Clint gave a slight nod. Jackson looked over at the pigs, who were now enjoying leftover chips on the pool deck. "You got a case number. Filed it this morning." Karen tried to interrupt, but the officer gave her a tired look. "Ma'am, you removed a man's gate and then held a pool party a few yards downhill. I'm not sure what outcome you were expecting." Karen's nostrils flared. "He's responsible for their behavior." Clint crossed his arms. "Well, ma'am, you freed them. Seems like they figured they were invited." Deputy the llama chose that exact moment to cannonball off the diving board, soaking half the party guests. One goat screamed, an actual scream, as it slid into the pool after him. A woman nearby started laughing so hard she dropped her mimosa. Karen's face turned beet red as she stormed away. "You haven't heard the last of me," Clint called. After her, "Oh, I'm counting on it." The crowd, meanwhile, had mostly stopped panicking. Some kids were now petting the pigs. One teen was filming a goat on the pool steps with her phone, muttering something about going viral. Clint sat back down in his lawn chair. Jackson stood beside him, amused. "You want me to help round them up?" "Nah," Clint said, watching Deputy snort water out his nose like a whale. "I figure they'll come home when they're done. They just wanted to cool off." Jackson chuckled. "I'll write up a report. But between you and me, I hope someone live-streamed this." And someone had. The video had already hit Facebook, racking up views by the minute. The caption read, "HOA tries to ban barn animals, gets barn animals in their pool instead." Karen had poked the wrong bear, but Clint wasn't done yet, because the real fireworks hadn't even started. Karen Witherspoon didn't sleep that night. She was too busy calling lawyers, scribbling statements, and trying to clean llama spit off her patio furniture with antibacterial wipes. Clint? He slept just fine, but by morning, both of them were. On the front page of the town's local news, llama allegedly attacks HOA president with projectile spit pigs, storms subdivision pool in Tennessee neighborhood, uprising goats defy HOA guidelines. "We just want snacks," claims one. Karen was mortified. Clint was amused. But what came next made both of them pause. Karen filed for a restraining order. Not against Clint. Not even against the ranch. Against the animals. The paperwork landed on the county clerk's desk with bold red ink reading, "Request to enforce no contact zone between pool area and offending livestock." The clerk thought it was a prank, until Karen herself marched into the courthouse in heels and a blazer, declaring it a public safety emergency. Her claim: the pigs were aggressive, the goats destructive, and the llama, she referred to him in the filing as the ringleader. Clint was notified of the restraining order by certified mail. He opened it with a slow smirk, standing in his barn while Deputy chewed on a feed bag behind him. "I guess you're legally intimidating now," he muttered to the llama. Clint didn't wait. He gathered every document he had, property surveys, deed copies, footage of Karen's contractor removing the gate, and went straight to his lawyer. And while Karen believed she'd launched the perfect legal counterstrike, she didn't realize something crucial. The footage Clint had was already uploaded, not just to the sheriff's office, but to YouTube. It had racked up 700,000 views in 48 hours, and the comments section, filled with people siding with the animals. Karen escalated faster than the pigs could swim. "Deputy deserves a Netflix special." Clint 2024, make llamas legal again. At the emergency hearing 2 days later, the courtroom was only. Karen arrived with 3 binders and a shaky PowerPoint presentation titled, "Why This Man is a Threat to Suburban Decency." Clint arrived with a USB stick and a bag of llama treats. Deputy stayed home. Court wasn't his scene. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Fuller, took one look at the restraining order request and sighed. "I'm sorry, you're suing a pig?" Karen stood proudly. 3 pigs, 2 goats, 1 llama, all unlicensed, all dangerous. Clint's lawyer stepped up. "Your Honor, Mr. Danner's livestock never left his property until the defendant's contractor removed the security gate without permission." The judge raised an eyebrow. Further, Clint's lawyer continued, Surveillance footage confirms this. We've submitted it as Exhibit A. They played the footage. Karen's hired man, under cover of night, sawing through the hinges, dragging the gate into a waiting pickup, and filling the post holes like he was burying a body. Karen tried to object, but the judge waved her off. Ma'am, did you or your contractor remove a physical barrier on this man's land? Karen stiffened. It was an eyesore, and technically the judge cut her off. Technically, that's vandalism and trespassing. Karen's voice trembled. He turned livestock into weapons. And you turned neighborhood management into personal revenge. The judge snapped. Karen's attorney whispered something, likely suggesting damage control, but the courtroom wasn't on her side. They were laughing. The clip of deputies spitting on Karen had already gone viral. Her authority had evaporated in front of an entire town. The judge dropped her gavel. Restraining order denied. HOA has no jurisdiction. All counterclaims by Mr. Daner may proceed. Karen's face flushed red, not just from rage, but from the entire gallery of people recording her on their phones as she stormed out of the courtroom. Clint stood quietly behind her, calm, solid, resolute. He tipped his hat. And murmured just loud enough for her to hear. Gates still open. Karen. Outside, reporters swarmed them. Clint said nothing, but deputies photo captioned accused llama refuses to comment would hit 1 million likes by sundown. And Clint? He wasn't done yet, because what he did next made sure Karen would never try to enter his property again. Karen wasn't seen in public for a few days after the courtroom spectacle. Word around the neighborhood was she'd turned her blinds, permanently shut, and hired a teenage nephew to deliver groceries. But Clint, he leaned into the attention. Local kids started visiting the edge of his ranch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous pool pigs or the rogue llama from the headlines. One mother even asked if Clint offered tours. He did on single quotes t-yet, but the idea planted itself in Clint's head like a seed. And just like that, his barnyard went from rural obscurity to a small-town sensation by the end of the week. He'd erected a new sign, "Welcome to Deputy Ranch. Educational farm tours available. Llama sightings not guaranteed but likely," and they came. Families, reporters, bloggers, even a food truck rolled up one Saturday. Clint didn't charge for entry, not yet, but he sold t-shirts with a cartoon goat chewing a pool noodle and the words, "Respect the gate." The best part? Every visitor walked away with a pamphlet on landowner rights, HOA overreach, and one page titled, "Know the difference between a donkey and a llama." The ranch was booming, and Karen was boiling, because she could see all of it from her second story window. She watched deputy pose with kids in sun hats, watched Clint shake hands with the mayor, watched pigs roll in kiddie pools and goats gnaw on souvenir bags. The same animals that ruined her pool party were now making Clint a local hero. And so, naturally, she retaliated the only way she knew. How? By calling an emergency HOA board meeting, 12 folding chairs, one passive-aggressive fruit tray, a PowerPoint titled, "Ranch Madness, Why It Threatens Us All." Karen stood at the front, pointer in hand. "He's mocking us," she said through gritted teeth. "Mocking our community, our bylaws, our way of life." One board member raised a hand. "But isn't his land technically not under our jurisdiction?" Karen didn't blink. Not yet. She pulled up a map, one clearly doctored with a highlighter and arrows drawn in what looked suspiciously like lipstick. "I propose a boundary expansion, a voluntary annexation of surrounding lots, including his ranch." "Voluntary?" someone asked. Karen smirked. "If we vote yes, we send the paperwork to the county. He'll be in the neighborhood whether he likes it or not." There was murmuring, doubt, but also fatigue. Karen had worn them down over years with meetings, letters, and gluten-free potlucks. The vote passed, barely. And within a week, Clint received another official-looking envelope. Notice of pending HOA annexation, proposed inclusion of Danner Ranch into Magnolia Ridge community. He opened it while bottle-feeding a baby goat. Deputy leaned over to chew the corner. Clint, read it twice. Then he chuckled. A low, dangerous kind of chuckle. If Karen wanted to play land games, she'd pick the wrong opponent. Because what she didn't know, Clint had friends in the zoning office, real ones. People who owed him favors from back when he helped reinforce flood barriers during a spring storm that saved half the county. That same afternoon, Clint made 3 calls. The next day, he filed an intent to repurpose part of his land, 12 acres, adjacent to Magnolia Ridge, into a public-use recreational animal preserve. Translation: anyone from the neighborhood could enter it, anytime, free of charge. And by state law, once opened for public use, that section of land couldn't be annexed under private HOA restrictions, but it could host barbecues, it could hold community events, it could serve as an outdoor classroom for kids learning about farming. And yes, it could be built with picnic tables right along the edge of Karen's back fence. By Friday, Clint had 10 volunteers building benches, setting up a fence, and pouring gravel for a nature trail. The new sign read, "Deputy's Backyard. A free agricultural experience for the Magnolia Ridge community. Kindly supervised children. Llamas may spit," and Karen, She stared out her window in horror as Clint's goats assembled like troops at dawn, a literal parade of piglets following. Behind them, she wasn't just losing, she was losing on her own turf. But instead of backing off, she struck harder. She called code enforcement and claimed Clint had created an unlicensed zoo. She said the animals were weapons and the land was unsafe. And that move would come back to destroy her in ways she never imagined. The code enforcement officer arrived on a Sunday morning, unannounced and clearly not ready for what he saw. Clint was waist-deep in a pen of baby goats, trying to teach one of them not to chew his belt. A dozen local kids stood nearby, petting pigs and asking questions about egg-laying hens. Parents laughed. One grandma brought zucchini bread, looked more like a church picnic than a violation of civil code. The officer, a young guy named Mike with a clipboard and nervous shoes, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Danner. Clint looked up. That's me. Mike cleared his throat. We got a formal complaint that you've opened an unlicensed animal attraction, possibly violating zoning ordinances. Clint set the goat down gently and nodded toward the shaded picnic area. Take a look around. We're not selling anything. No admission fee. No animals for hire. Just some local families meeting animals they see on their breakfast labels. Mike hesitated. It's really educational. Clint handed him a laminated sheet. Here's the state exemption code for private landowners running public access education programs, and a signed letter from the county supervisor approving my intent to designate this area for public outreach. Mike blinked at the signatures. Oh, this is all above board. Clint smiled. That's what I told your boss last week when I gave him a tour. Mike stuffed the clipboard under his arm, looking sheepish. Well, I guess I'll close the case. But Clint wasn't done. He turned and gestured toward the property line, the tall wooden fence marking the edge of Magnolia Ridge, HOA territory. You see that fence, Mike? Mike nodded. Clint pointed to a camera mounted high on a post. Last week, that fence shook at 2 a.m. My security camera caught two people scaling it. Want to guess who they were? Mike frowned. That's a serious accusation. Come by the barn, Clint said. I'll show you the footage. What Mike saw made his eyes go wide. Karen, and someone else, a man in a hoodie climbing over the fence, dropping into Clint's pasture, and running toward the corner where he stored hay bales. Karen had filed a formal complaint about him while she was trespassing on camera. Mike scratched his head. What were they doing back there? Clint turned to him, voice low. Looks like they were trying to plant something. Maybe damage the irrigation line. Maybe worse. Mike stepped back, pale. This needs to be reported. It already was, Clint said. Sheriff's Department is coming out this week, and legal counsel's drafting a cease and desist. Mike nodded, then added quietly, you might want to call the city health department too. Clint raised an eyebrow. Why? Mike hesitated, then leaned closer. There have been complaints about the HOA pool. Since your animals visited, it hasn't passed inspection. They found E. coli and trace animal waste in the water. Karen tried to blame you, but word is, the pool wasn't up to code before your pigs ever showed up. Clint's lips curled into a grin. So she weaponized my livestock against a pool that was already failing inspection? Mike shrugged. If the city shuts it down, that'll be permanent. Karen may have sunk the HOA with her own complaints. By the end of the day, two more surprises hit Magnolia Ridge. First, a letter to all residents from the health department. Community pool closure, immediate. Source of contamination under investigation. Repairs estimated at $17,000. Second, a new social media page launched by Clint's nephew titled Deputies Dispatch, with daily clips of the animals and their adventures. Each one racking up thousands of views. The top video. Deputy the llama glaring at Karen's house while chewing hay captioned, he knows she's watching. Karen's phone blew up. Residents were furious. Kids were crying. The summer pool party season was over, and their own HOA president had caused it, but she wasn't ready to back down. That night, Clint heard something slam against his mailbox. He stepped out and found a crumpled letter with red ink scrawled across the front. Final warning, keep your animals off our side or we'll call the state. But Clint wasn't worried. Because what Karen didn't know was that Clint had just purchased the one thing she cherished most in the neighborhood, and she'd find out soon, the hard way. Karen never saw the sale coming. She was too busy drafting her next legal threat, meeting with the remnants of the HOA board, and trying to spin the pool disaster as a neighborhood-wide sabotage event. But while she was wagging her finger at Clint's animals, Clint was quietly doing paperwork at the county recorder's office. And 1 week later, just after dawn, a plain brown envelope landed on Karen's porch. She opened it, still half asleep. Coffee in hand, notice of ownership transfer, Magnolia Ridge, HOA common property, clubhouse and recreational area owner, Clint Danner. Her mug hit the tile floor and shattered. She read it again. The clubhouse. Sold. Apparently. The HOA had been behind on taxes for 3 years, something Karen had never noticed because she'd appointed herself treasurer and president. The city, quietly tired of the paperwork mess, had auctioned it. Clint had been the only bidder. He now owned the very building where Karen ran her little HOA. Empire. The pool. The tennis court. The meeting hall. All of it. She ran out to her car in slippers, drove straight to the clubhouse, and found a brand sign posted on the door. Private property Deputy Ranch Holdings, LLC, future use. Agricultural Community Education Center. Access by appointment only. Karen stared at the locked doors like she was about to scream them open. Inside the clubhouse, windows. Clint had already hung framed photos, one of Deputy the Llama beside a little girl holding a sign that read HOA Free Zone. And right below that, a flyer. Coming soon, Deputy Ranch Youth Agriculture Day hosted in your former clubhouse. By mid-morning the news broke, rancher buys HOA clubhouse after legal feud. Former President furious. Residents were stunned. Some cheered. Others were just relieved. Someone competent had taken over the mess. Clint never gloated. He didn't have to. Instead, he invited the neighborhood to a community ice cream social held on the lawn of the former clubhouse. Kids came, families came, even some of the HOA board showed up sheepishly. They posed with goats and smiled for selfies. Karen watched it all from her window, blinds twitching like the last gasp of a sinking ship. And then came the knock. She opened the door to find Sheriff Connors, the same one who'd laughed when she tried to file charges against a pig, standing with a clipboard and an official county notice. Ms. Witherspoon, he said, "We're here about that anonymous vandalism complaint. Turns out it's not so anonymous." Karen folded her arms. "That footage is fake. That could be anyone on that camera." Connors tilted his head. "Karen, you wore your HOA badge over your bathrobe? The llama could have identified you." She turned pale. He handed her a citation. Trespassing, property damage, attempted sabotage of a private irrigation system. "You've got a hearing next month?" Karen slammed the door without a word, but it didn't matter. The clip of her climbing Clint's fence in her robe, fuzzy slippers, and carrying what looked like a bucket of spoiled eggs, had already hit the internet. 1.2 million views in 24 hours. The top comment, "This HOA drama has more plot twists than Netflix." And now, Clint had the final say, because not only did he control the ranch, not only did he own the clubhouse, he was also filing to establish a nonprofit foundation using the facility. Deputy Ranch Community Farm and Education Center. It came with tax benefits, zoning protection, and the authority to host town events on Karen's former turf. When the mayor heard about it, she scheduled the town's summer fair on Clint's new property, and the icing on the cake, one of the baby goats Karen had tried to ban, named after her, Little Karen, a tiny bleeding thing with a bad attitude and a taste for paperwork. She'd just been made the official mascot of the Deputy Ranch Youth Program. Karen's world wasn't just collapsing, it was being rebranded, but she wasn't done. Not yet, because as the town rallied around Clint, Karen started digging through old HOA documents and discovered something buried in the original subdivision charter, something that could tear everything back down. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. While Clint's new community farm center blossomed with smiling kids, goats in tiny party hats, and banners reading "Respect the Gate," Karen locked herself in her home office, drowning in legal pads and forgotten HOA documents. NHOA.10, an old brittle subdivision charter dated 23 years back. It predated most of the current neighborhood, signed by the original developers before Clint had even bought the land. But there it was, buried in legalese and faded ink. Provision 7.3. Protective buffer zone. Residential surroundings of agricultural adjacent properties may be regulated to ensure harmony and visual uniformity. Karen's hands trembled as she read it again and again. To her, it meant this. If Clint's land bordered Magnolia Ridge, and if the HOA had a protective buffer clause, then she could argue his barn, animals, signage, and gatherings violated the original developer's harmony clause. She called an emergency lawyer, not the HOA's, her own. He laughed at first. "Karen, you want to enforce a buffer zone against a man who owns the building where your HOA used to meet?" She snapped. "I want to shut him down." 3 days later, a legal notice was taped to Clint's barn gate. Intent to enforce developer charter restriction. Cease operation of agricultural activities that disrupt residential harmony. Clint read it in silence while Bojangles the pig snored behind him. The disruptions listed included llama-induced property, devaluation, excessive pig laughter, seriously goats appearing in Instagram selfies without neighborhood consent, the presence of signs labeled Karen Free Zone. Clint didn't laugh. Not this time, because this wasn't a petty complaint, it was a strategic strike. If the city reviewed the original charter and agreed it applied, it could restrict Clint's ability to host events, allow public access, or even house certain animals. Karen had dug into history, and for once, found a weapon that didn't look ridiculous. The next morning, Clint met with his lawyer, zoning officials, and the Deputy Ranch Advisory Committee, which included 2 retired teachers, a veteran beekeeper, and a goat named Luther with a Bodie. The zoning officer, a wiry man named Hal, scratched his head as he held the brittle subdivision charter. "Well, she ain't wrong. Technically, this clause exists, but..." Clint looked up but Hal grinned. It only applies if your property wasn't already zoned for AG use when the neighborhood was developed. Clint nodded slowly. And mine was. Hal handed back the paper. Exactly. Her clause is meaningless. But she doesn't know that. That night, Clint hosted a bonfire on the edge of the ranch, right by the property line. Dozens of families came, hot chocolate flowed, kids rode ponies, and one of the goats wore a sheriff's badge. Karen watched from her window, heart pounding, jaw clenched. She was sure she had him this time. Then, just before the firecrackers started, Clint stood on a hay bale, lifted a microphone, and made an announcement. Before we begin tonight's fireworks, I just wanted to thank y'all for the support. This community center means more to me than most of you know, but one person's been working very hard to make sure it doesn't succeed. Karen's heart began racing. Clint held up the same faded charter she'd used, so I figured I'd share some history. He paused, then smiled. Turns out, this here clause she's trying to use to shut me down doesn't apply. Why? Because this ranch was here first. It's legally protected ag land, zoned in 1999. The neighborhood came afterward. They built around me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some laughed. One of the kids shouted, "Get her, Clint." Clint continued, "But I ain't mad. In fact, I'm grateful because her stunt helped me uncover something else. ... He held up a second folder, a copy of the original developer's agreement that also includes this little gem. Provision 8.6. If the HOA becomes insolvent and loses operational authority, any property owner within a quarter-mile can file to absorb its rights and assets. He looked right toward her house, and guess who just filed? Karen's knees buckled. She dropped the coffee she'd been holding and gripped the window frame, like it might collapse with her. Clint didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He just smiled, that slow, Tennessee kind of smile that meant it's already done. Fireworks exploded behind him, and Karen knew she hadn't just lost the clubhouse. She'd just lost the HOA itself. The fireworks fizzled into smoke trails. The crowd clapped and cheered. Kids ran around with glow sticks, and Clint Danner stepped down from his hay bale like a man who had just closed a 10-year chapter with a single smile. Karen Witherspoon, meanwhile, didn't sleep. That night, not a wink, because the next morning, every resident of Magnolia Ridge received a formal notice delivered in a crisp white envelope, effective immediately. Magnolia Ridge HOA has been formally dissolved due to financial insolvency, leadership vacancy, and charter revocation. All remaining assets have been legally absorbed by Deputy Ranch Holdings, LLC. It was signed by the county clerk and witnessed by 2 attorneys. But what shocked everyone even more was what Clint did next. He didn't banish the HOA members. He didn't raise taxes or fees. He didn't turn the pool into a pig spa or repaint the tennis courts with goat murals, though he joked about it once online. Instead, he forgave all dues, waived any pending fines, and posted this message on the old HOA website. Welcome to a freer community. You're no longer being watched, but you're always welcome to watch Deputy the Llama do his morning dance. Come by the ranch open gates. Real neighbors, no clipboards. The sights, banner photo, Deputy in sunglasses next to a goat with a popsicle. It went viral within hours, but Karen, she had nothing left to control. No meetings, no board, no budget. Her title was gone. Her clubhouse, Clint's her leverage, evaporated like steam off a hot sidewalk. She tried calling the county to contest the dissolution. They sent her a pre-recorded message. If this is regarding Deputy Ranch Holdings, please note the matter has been resolved. And yes, the llama is registered. That week, Clint hosted a Freedom from the HOA celebration on the old HOA lawn, now renamed Deputy Commons. Tents popped up with barbecue, homemade lemonade, goat races, and live bluegrass from a trio called The Angry Chickens, which featured one actual chicken. Clint wore a shirt that read, "I'd rather be ranching than arguing with a clipboard." And just as the sun dipped behind the hills, a small parade of animals trotted through the crowd. Bojangles, the pig, led the way in a sparkly cowboy hat. Deputy followed, draped in an American flag cape. Behind them, little Karen the goat stopped and licked someone's ice cream cone. Karen Witherspoon, now just Karen the neighbor, sat on her porch, alone. Her lawn was still perfectly trimmed, her hedges shaped like swans, but her rule was over. She clutched a glass of wine and glared through her blinds as the whole neighborhood laughed without her. Then a knock. She opened the door to find a small gift basket inside. A jar of goat milk lotion, a Deputy Ranch t-shirt, and a handwritten note. No hard feelings. You're welcome to visit the animals anytime. Just knock first. The new gate stays closed. Karen closed the door. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't rip the note up. She read it twice. And later that evening, she stood on her porch, watching the goats play near the old pool, now converted into a public picnic space. She wouldn't say it aloud, but part of her was impressed. Clint hadn't just won. He'd transformed her tyranny into something the whole community loved. And online. The final update video, titled HOA vs. Ranch. The final stampede, passed 3 million views. Viewers from around the country tuned in to see the petty drama. The animals, The Fall of Karen, and the Rise of Deputy Ranch. The comment section lit up with Clint's a legend. Deputy for president? Imagine losing your HOA to a goat farmer. Karen never stood a chance. This is what happens when you remove a rancher's gate. You let out a movement. By the time fall rolled in, Clint had launched a podcast, a kid's book about Deputy, and was in talks to license the story for a streaming mini-series. And as for the animals, they just kept being themselves. Goats, head-butted pumpkins, bojangles, took naps in wheelbarrows. Deputy, always on time, stood proudly at the gate each morning, daring anyone to mess with his land again, but nobody did, because in that town, from that day on, the gate stayed up. The animals roamed free, the clipboard never returned.